Hi guys, welcome to the TXCC podcast. I'm Josh, and today we'll be talking about big tech censorship and the recent events following the Capitol Hill riots. So thank you everyone for joining me. Thank you Keiki, Suji, and Lisa. And let's start with some recent news. So we saw President Trump get censored recently on Twitter, and he was banned, I think, during and after the Capitol Hill riots. So I think his account is permanently banned for now. And then a few days later, an app called Parler, which prides itself on the freedom of speech and First Amendment rights, also got censored. And it was taken completely off of a lot of web services, including Amazon and Google. So I believe most people are condemning the riots, but censorship is a topic that is a lot more divided and a lot more controversial. So today we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to do a new format. We're going to split Keiki and Lisa are going to support the censorship in the recent events. Suji will go against it, and I'll help Suji out because he's the only guy, right? So basically, just to make sure everyone understands, everything is hypothetical. Just because I split them up doesn't mean they support, that side exactly. We're just trying to spark some conversation and, take away any bias that we might have and just talk about it purely from a objective point of view. So we don't have to worry about being politically incorrect today because we're technically not talking about our own opinions, right? All right, so I'll make it a lot easier on all you guys. So with that being said, just let me know where you guys have gotten most of your news from the events that have happened recently, and just like in general. Where do you guys normally get your news from? Is it off of Instagram, Facebook, CNN, Fox? You guys can go around and tell me just some of your, and I know you guys do some research on this, so where do you guys get your news from?
So I mainly get my news from Reddit, just easy source of news. I get to scroll down and see what's going on.
Mhm.
And obviously it's really hard to get news that's split. It's always going to be like one side or the other. So I try to broaden and look at maybe the Wall Street Journal and other stuff, maybe, and some stuff like that. And the ideas that I get from it usually is very mixed, and I think it's important to do that because it's a topic that we need to discuss a lot because there's two ways to it. So yeah.
I get a lot of my news from social media. While conducting research for this podcast, I've actually been looking at a lot of Washington Post articles, but other than that, it's usually social media, word of mouth, just updates, maybe catching a glimpse on TV every now and then.
Yeah, for me, I kind of just read the news as it comes across, sometimes in the news article in my phone. And then when I'm scrolling on YouTube, there's usually always a recommended news section that I'll watch a couple of times. I also get a lot of my news from the kind of comedy politicians Seth Meyers and, the whole deal. But then sometimes I'll also go and read online articles for something that I'm more interested in.
Sweet. So, all right, let's jump right into it. Thank you guys for your input. We'll actually come back to that at the end. So, we're going to start with the first piece of evidence about censorship. So, let me give you some facts that have been research facts about censorship that have recently come out. So, this is information from Freedom House's annual report on the internet. And they looked at the countries in which censorship was the biggest and the smallest. And in the countries that censorship was really dominant were China, North Korea, Iran, versus countries in which censorship was not as prevalent in UK, Canada, Iceland, and Germany. So what do you get from this, and what do you get from this evidence? This is the first neutral evidence that we have.
I think you can tell based on each respective country's type of government. You can tell there's kind of a correlation between how much censorship goes on. And it's also in parts of the world, like the countries you mentioned with a lot of censorship are usually developing countries, and more developed countries who have been industrialized for a longer time tend to have slightly relaxed stances on censorship. And you can tell it's kind of like the Eastern Western world divide a little bit.
I think it also has to do with the power of the government. If the government has a lot of power, then they want everyone to respect the government, and that's why they censor things that might insult that balance.
Yeah, and there's one more piece of evidence for this first point. It's so the same research article, they conducted a survey of 1,049 people, and they basically asked, what do you think should be censored, right? And 88.1% thought that child pornography and pedophilia should be censored. 60.4 said there should be censorship of things that incite violence. 59.4 said there should be for criminal activity, and 54.3 said there should be for racist content. And then a surprising point, which I thought was kind of low, was 48.9, only for so less than half thought there should be censorship for misinformation. So what do you guys think about that point?
I think that attests to the nature of the subject, the fact that this is so divisive, and a lot of the numbers you mentioned were around the 50s, right? The half mark. So there is no agreement on the subject of what should and shouldn't be censored. So, I mean, it is a divisive issue. It's interesting to see how different governments approach it as well. Yeah, I think I don't know if there's one right answer per se on what exactly should be censored, but I do agree that there should be some amount of censorship.
Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to add to that point?
Yeah, and I think for a lot of the subjects you talked about, there's a lot of gray areas. There's really no black and white line, like what is considered racist? How far is too racist? I think that's a lot of the issues that people have with talking about censorship. It's where do we draw the line?
Yeah, I think one big issue too, especially now, is arising now, is like something to be funny, but it's like really politically incorrect. But the thing is that someone is insulted by it, and they could censor you, and you're just like, I'm just making a joke. Like, there's a huge gray area with that kind of stuff, especially like in TV shows and stuff like that. People are trying to cancel TV shows for saying something bad, but they were just joking, and it's not like they actually believe in that.
But to add on to that, platforms such as The Onion, where we all know that it is misinformation, right? But it's said in a joking manner. So are you going to censor that, right? If you want to censor misinformation, is that something you're going to do with like the jokes that you said? It's very gray.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Let's move on to evidence point number 2. So now we're going to start spicing things up a little bit. We're going to start giving you some evidence that might be either pro-censorship or anti-censorship. So the first one is pro-censorship in light of the recent events. So this is quoting some of the quotes from President Trump. So he says, "We won the election by a lot," and in all caps, "fight for it," tweeted December 18th. And then in a later tweet, he said, "We'll fight like hell," whenever he's talking about if the Democrats took the office. So I think it's undebatable that he used the word fight in this piece of evidence. But what did he mean by this? I think a lot of people might have taken it differently, right? And could the riots have been started because he used the word fight? What do you guys think?
So in my opinion, former President Trump was a leader of our country. You know, he kind of represents the entire United States, and he has such a huge platform that everything he puts out on social media has to be carefully thought through, right? There's probably a lot of people that should go through what he tries to post because it influences a huge amount of people, right? And so the fact that he used incendiary like wording such as "we need to fight" or "we need to fight like hell," it's subtle, but it's a message, you know, to his supporters. He's not trying to take the peaceful way out that America has done for almost, I would say, 2 centuries, more than that actually. But he's trying to incite riots and violence from his supporters because he, in a position like his, can't really do it himself. So that's what I think.
Adding on to that, words are quite subjective in their meaning. Fight itself can be used for a verbal fight, like an argument with somebody. It could be used as, you know, to describe the riots that happened with, you know, physical violence. So adding on to what Lisa said, he, as the role of a president, there is a certain grace that should be respected. And by using terms such as fight like hell, I believe that grace was not maintained. And yeah.
Yeah, I think censorship is a problem with that, and he deserves to have been censored because he was like speaking out of line of his position. But I do think censorship should be based on the position too, because obviously people are going to listen to what he says. But if some random dude just goes, "Hey, let's fight," then it's not going to have much of an impact. And I don't think that necessarily deserves to be censored. But definitely because he's in such a high position, he's so influential, is definitely something that we need to take into consideration.
Yeah, for sure. That's great points from all of you guys. Yeah, so let's go into evidence number 3. This is also from Twitter, and this one's maybe on the side of anti-censorship. So we saw that Trump's tweets got censored, and he got banned from Twitter. But let me show you guys a tweet that was not censored, and I think I recently read this article on Fox News. So this is a tweet that was not censored by a leader in what country? I think it was Iran or Iraq. It was a very influential leader, and he said, "Our stance against Israel is the same stance we have always taken. Israel is a malignant, cancerous tumor in the West Asian region that has to be removed and eradicated. It is possible and it will happen." And hold on, let me see if I can find who tweeted this, because I think it was the supreme leader of Iran or Iraq. I'm not sure which country. So what do you guys think about that?
Like it was discussed previously, the role that a person has also should play a part in the amount of censorship they receive. And seeing as you said it was tweeted by a leader, I do believe that erring on the side of censorship, it should not have been allowed to remain on the platform.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, peace is like one of the most the most valued things we have in the world right now, and it's the most important thing for a leader to actually display peace and like traditional moral values. So, if you're a leader and you have an impact, and you know that you have a huge impact on many people, it's important to know the consequences of saying something that might incite violence.
Yeah, so I actually just found out who said it. It was Iran's supreme leader, correct me if I pronounce this wrong, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. So he said this, I believe, a few years ago, and it remained on Twitter. So I think a lot of people are pointing at this as to why Trump should not have been censored.
I have a quick question for you.
Mm-hmm.
What were the results of this tweet? Were there any direct results?
So I actually did not research that, but I do not believe Iran took any like attacks against Israel. Although I do know there's a lot of tension between the two. There's been a lot of beef for a long time. So I actually do not know. So that's actually also a pretty good point. So do the people in Iran go on Twitter, or is it just like the people in the US, right? So he posted it on, maybe he wanted Americans to see it because maybe it was a political move, right? Good point.
So adding on to that, a lot that goes into censorship is the person who's, putting that information out there, the audience that's receiving it, and then the implications of that information. So based on what I know and based on what you've told me, I don't know that there were any severe implications of that tweet. Whereas we can see that Donald Trump's tweets did incite some amount of reaction. The riots at the Capitol were significant, they were violent, and they were something that's going to mar the history of America forever, So in that sense, I understand why one should have been censored and was not, whereas one should have been censored and was, So there is a distinction, and I don't think it is unfair to leave one up and not leave the other.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'll add on. You said that tweet from Iran's supreme leader was from a couple years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't think we should be basing today's decision on stuff that happened in the past. Like, I think we can all agree that the whole world, not to mention the US, has come an extremely long way since even, I would say, 3-4 years ago. And yeah, maybe I agree that Iran's supreme leader's tweet should have been censored whenever it was actually tweeted. But I don't think that is a legitimate and logical argument to make that, Iran's leader wasn't censored a couple years ago, so therefore Trump shouldn't be censored now. It's a different world, you know? And as we progress, we learn about things that offend other people and things that can cause violence. And we should constantly be changing our mindset about what things can and can't be on the internet.
Yeah, it's only when Trump was president is when Twitter started becoming a very like viable source of, I guess, presidential information or leader information. So you can't really blame them for not censoring because maybe they thought that was completely wrong. But after growing and seeing what happens over the last 4 years, I think now we're probably going to have a different opinion compared to what we had 4 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so there's that, and let's move on to the last 2 points, which are neutral. All right, so basically these tweets, evidence points 4 and 5 are from what Trump said on the day of the riot, and the evidence point 5 is what he said during the protest and shortly after. So there's quite a bit of tweets that he posted, so I will read all of them so you guys can kind of get like a timeline of what he said. So on the day of January 6th, actually no, I think this was during his because he was speaking nearby, so this might have been, I think this was what he said while he was speaking. So he said, Republicans are constantly fighting like a boxer with his hands tied behind his back. So he's bringing up like the fighting analogy again. It's like a boxer, and we want to be so nice. We want to be so respectful of everybody, including bad people. And then later he says, now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy, talking about how maybe the election was rigged and he got cheated out of his spot. And then later on, he goes, we have to come to demand that Congress do the right thing and only count the electors who have been lawfully slated. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Today, we will see whether Republicans stand strong for the integrity of our elections, but whether or not they stand strong for our country. Our country has been under siege for a long time, far longer than this 4-year period. And then evidence point 5 is what he said during the protest. So once people started breaking in, he said, please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful. But he tweeted this at 2:38 p.m. And by that point, the mob had already shattered windows and they had already gone inside of the building. In his second statement, which is on video, he started repeating the false claims about the fraudulent election, right? He kept on talking about that. He said, we have to have peace, so go home. We love you. You're very special, to the people who had broken into the Capitol. And then at the end of the day, he said, remember this day forever. What do you guys think?
First reaction, a lot of it was very hypocritical. By saying the words fight, by saying the words, by claiming that it was a fraudulent election, he is inciting this violence and this passion within whoever, wants to accept that. But he's also saying to conduct a peaceful protest, and like the analogy of the boxer with the hands tied, where you assume that they're not punching, they're not fighting physically, they're still trying, but they're not causing violence. So I think it is very hypocritical of him to say both of those things. One could say that he is trying to save face by encouraging peace and peaceful protest, but when you look at his prior remarks, a lot of them are quite incendiary and aggravating.
Yeah, right now it's kind of, you could clearly tell he's trying to turn a blind eye to the actual violence is going on, and if someone confronts him about it, he's trying to establish that role that he could just say, well, I was telling him to be peaceful, I wasn't saying anything about violence, right? But it's really important because you can see the change in his tweets, like how it turns from pretty much like just let's fight to let's fight, and then it just kind of gradually transitions to go home, not no more, stuff like that. And you could tell he's like kind of being forced into it or advised to do it, and it's the fact that he still continues to complain about the fraudulent election, which is kind of scary because it's not like it seems like the issue won't resolve itself.
Yeah, and with his claims about a fraudulent election, those claims have been disproved over and over and over again by people in both parties, actually, all throughout the country. And one thing that sort of bothers me about it is that they claim that the presidential election was rigged, right? So why don't more people claim that like the senatorial elections were rigged too. No, like they were on the same ballot. That's just my perspective. I think it's a little bit hypocritical to just focus on one part of the ballot when, anyways. But and I think just the tweets that he sent out saying, "Oh, we should respect the Capitol Police." It's just incredibly disrespectful because we all know that a police officer was killed on the Capitol riot during the Capitol riots, suffered an attack to the head, headed to the hospital, died shortly thereafter. Rest in peace, Brian Sicknick. And just the volumes that his tweets speak shows that he, I guess, really just will kind of do anything, to try and take this election, which is incredibly terrifying to think about when he was supposed to be the leader of our free country.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind repeating that very last tweet?
The one, remember this day forever?
The one before that.
Before that. We have to have peace. Is it that one? So
it's
go
the
home.
one where he tells him to go home.
Okay, yeah. He said, so this was in a video statement, actually. He said, we have to have peace, so go home. We love you. You're very special.
So that I find, again, contradictory. All of this seems contradictory to me. With other terrorist attacks, with other riots that have been, conducted by people of different colors or beliefs than the people who were attacking the Capitol, he was very quick to condemn and very quick to raise action against them. And then when you consider the fact that these were a vast majority Republican, white, male people attacking the Capitol, there was, a kind suggestion to go home, we love you, It's very, very blatant that he is hypocritical in these words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it still goes to show you like how much power he has over so much of America that he's just able to say something, almost imply it, just saying fight, which it could mean violence or peace, but the fact that he's able to imply it, people actually use violence and people are actually listening to it. And that's the problem with his platform. He just has such a big one because he's obviously the president. So he was a president. So I mean, it's important that we need to control what the people at the top are saying. It's quite clear.
Yeah. And then I think another thing is how President Trump was always saying, well, we need to fight for our democracy. We need to take back our democracy, and supporting his following and his supporters. But when you see live videos of what actually happened during the Capitol, there were people taking down the United States flag and replacing it with a Trump one. Like, I don't think that's very democratic at all. In fact, that's literally the exact opposite, just seeing how hypocritical some of his followers are, and obviously he himself is. It's just, it's kind of sad, to see that some people who in our country have really gone down this far.
And tracing this back to censorship, he did have the freedom of speech. He still does. The platforms that have taken his voice down are private platforms. The government has nothing to do with anything that any of their actions, right?
Yeah.
So, and by controlling what they can or can't take down, by saying that they're not allowed to take this down, there is an infringement on those platforms' right of freedom of expression, right? They can decide what they do and do not present. And ultimately, it's a matter not of freedom of speech, but of the freedom of consequence. His words do have consequences, and he's facing them now, right? His words themselves were not censored before they came out; they were censored afterwards. So that is also another, big factor that goes into considering this.
Yeah, for sure. So that was actually our last point. So to conclude, I want to ask you guys, did you guys learn a lot from this? Did you guys know about these tweets and these statements before this podcast? And if you did, where did you find them? And also, or did you just hear like what other people said and maybe saw some like generalizations. You know, I think we really got into the specifics of what happened today. So does that make the whole situation a lot more clear for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I am not active on Twitter, but I had seen these tweets, you know, briefly, seen people's reactions to them. This podcast did definitely, you know, help clarify a little bit what exactly happened and chronologically. But yeah, this has made my opinions a little bit more clear with regard to this topic.
Yeah, I definitely heard some of those tweets, not all of them, but most of them I heard. Just saw it like scrolling through Reddit and other news sources, and is definitely this podcast was interesting because I also did some research on really the other side of censorship, why censorship can actually be harmful. And one really interesting thing I found is that really if big tech is allowed to censor things, that they actually have this sense of like power over everything. So for example, like Jeff Bezos is he has like so much control over Amazon, and that also includes a lot of media because of Prime Video. And Amazon also contains sources like HBO Max and Hulu and all of that, all the other streaming sources. And being so like in such a powerful position, he's essentially able to gatekeep what media gets posted on Amazon and what doesn't. And so there were like many documentaries that got released against him that are actually factually true, such as like there's one called Killing Free Speech, which has to do with his gatekeeping kind of thing. And there are a lot that he just took down, and he had taken off Amazon because it sort of hurt his image. And that is one reason why censorship can be a problem. And if we do have freedom of speech in the end of the day, and we should be allowed to peacefully and factually make our own claims against something that we think is unfair.
Right. I mean, I think even in the Constitution it states free speech should be allowed until it hurts and infringes upon the rights of another, right? So I think we need to take that all in mind. I think more people, when they're talking about instances relating to Trump or really just anything in general, keep that thought in mind. Whenever something becomes of a security threat to the United States or to just anyone in general, I think that's when we need to reconsider what we think free speech should be considered as.
And adding on to that, I think free speech is less of a right and more of a responsibility on behalf of everybody who is engaging in it and who is divulging that speech and who is taking in that speech, right? Yeah, just be considerate of what you're saying.
For sure, yeah. I think for me too, before I did this podcast and all like the research I didn't know too much about the situation. I just kind of saw like glimpses on the news while my dad was watching. And I think for me personally, this is just I think just doing like the research and like looking at all the tweets and like having like a timeline, it really does help you understand the situation, and it probably will for a lot of other situations. So before we conclude, let me just give you, so the last four evidence points 4 and 5, I used a website called PolitiFact. So what they actually do is fact check news, politicians' words, and like common beliefs. So like whenever like Trump and Biden were debating, they would be fact checking every single thing they said. And also for like controversial issues, they'll give you like a timeline. So it really just helps you get a better picture. And I think they're nonpartisan. So it's neutral, and it lets you just get a good picture of what happened. And I think that really helped me today. I'm sure it helped a lot of you guys too. So yeah, thank you guys so much for doing this podcast with me. I definitely had a lot of fun doing this. I will link the articles I use for the research in the YouTube video I post. But yeah, that's it for this week, and we'll see you guys next week.